They didn't just tow my boat. They dragged 30 years of service off my dock, in the dead of night, without warning, without shame. To them, it was just an eyesore. To me, it was a Navy patrol vessel, a memorial, a promise, one I made to my wife, and to the men I lost at sea. The HOA thought they could bury that history under fines and bylaws. But they didn't know what they were touching. They didn't know who they were touching. So I made one call, and when the Navy answered, everything changed. The agents came. The headlines followed. And by the time Karen realized what she'd done, it was too late. This isn't just a story about a boat, it's about honor, it's about justice. And what happens when you push the wrong veteran too far? Let me tell you how it all went down. The lake woke slowly each morning, wrapped in a thin veil of mist that rose from the water like breath on cold glass. Pines stood sentinel along the shore, their needles whispering secrets to the wind, while the surface rippled in gentle, uneven breaths. Never quite a tide, just the quiet pulse of inland water. At the end of my private pier, the old patrol vessel rocked in her slip lines, creaking softly against the cleats. After 28 years in the Navy, that sound was the closest thing to a lullaby I knew. My name is Cal Jensen, Commander retired. I bought this single-story cedar house 3 years after burying my wife, Ellen. Our son Danny had just shipped out to Marine boot camp, and the Pensacola home we'd shared for 2 decades suddenly felt too large, too full of her absence. Every room echoed with photographs, half-finished quilts, the faint trace of her lavender soap. I couldn't stay. So I drove north until the roads narrowed and the air smelled of pine instead of salt, until I found this quiet cove on the Georgia-Alabama line where an HOA-governed community hugged the shoreline. The house itself was modest, low-roof, narrow porch, weathered siding the color of storm clouds, but the lot ran straight down to the water, and the pier was mine alone. That was all I needed. That and the right to keep her moored there. Her official designation was VP 121, a 32-foot patrol craft that once ran silent escort along contested coastlines, whose names I still can't speak aloud. She had carried me through fire and fog, through nights when the radio crackled with orders, and mornings when it brought only bad news. She was the place where I learned over a scrambled satellite link off Okinawa that Ellen's cancer had returned for the final time. She was the helm where I read Danny's first letter from Paris Island, the ink smudged with proud tears he'd never admit to shedding. Every rivet, every scarred plank, every inch of faded gunmetal paint held a fragment of my life. When I retired, the Navy allowed me to take custodianship under a rare preservation program. The contract was ironclad, the vessel remained federal property, but I was her steward. I kept her immaculate hull scrubbed, bright work polished engine, serviced American flag, replaced the moment its colors began to fade. She never left the pier without clearance, never disturbed the peace with so much as an idle rev. To the neighbors, she was simply a large gray boat. To me, she was sanctuary. For the first year, no one complained. The HOA sent a glossy welcome folder, a few residents waved from passing golf carts, and life settled into a rhythm I hadn't known since childhood. I mowed the lawn on Saturdays, paid dues on time, nodded politely at community picnics. The vessel rested quietly at the end of my pier, like an old dog sleeping in the sun. I spent evenings aboard, feet propped on the combing, reading, or simply listening to the water slap against her sides. Some nights I talked to Ellen as if she were sitting beside me, her head on my shoulder the way it used to be. The stars over the lake were bright enough that I could almost believe she heard. I thought the silence would last. I should have known better. Silence, like deep water, never stays unbroken for long. One spring morning, while I was polishing the chrome rail with a soft cloth, I noticed a woman standing at the edge of my lawn. Tall posture, rigid as a flagstaff, bleach blonde bob, sharp enough to cut glass, red blazer, vivid against the green. She held a leather-bound notepad, the way some people hold a weapon. Mr. Jensen, she called, voice clipped, efficient. I straightened. That's me. Karen Whitmore, she said, stepping onto the pier without waiting for invitation. Newly elected president of the Lakeside Preserve Homeowners Association. I'm making rounds to ensure compliance with community standards. Her eyes swept over the vessel with the cool appraisal of someone inventorying flaws. She's a handsome craft, she allowed, but I'm afraid she exceeds our size restrictions, and, well, the color scheme doesn't quite blend with our natural aesthetic. I wiped my hands on a rag. She's federally registered, ma'am. Navy Preservation Program. I have the documentation inside if you'd care to see it. Karen offered a smile that never reached her eyes. I'm sure you do. All the same, we've received concerns. Some residents find the military appearance a touch intimidating. We strive for tranquility here. Tranquility. The word landed between us like a gauntlet. I glanced at the flag, snapping gently at the stern, then back at her. She's a memorial as much as a boat, protected under Title 10. I keep her shipshape and quiet. She bothers no one. For now, Karen replied, jotting something on her notepad. But guidelines are guidelines. I'll bring this to the board. Expect correspondence. She turned on her heel and walked away, blazer bright as a warning flare against the morning light. I watched her go, a coldness settling in my chest that had nothing to do with the breeze off the water. For the first time since moving here, the lake felt a fraction less like home. That evening, I sat in the cabin with a cup of coffee gone cold, staring at Ellen's letters tucked safely in the drawer beneath the helm. The wood still smelled faintly of her perfume, or maybe that was only memory. I ran a thumb over the ribbon that bound them, wondering how long tranquility could survive, someone determined to enforce it at gunpoint. Outside, the vessel rocked gently in her slip, patient as ever. She had weathered worse storms than Karen Whitmore. So had I. Karen Whitmore wasted no time. Within a week, a crisp envelope slid through my mail slot, embossed with the lakeside preserve crest, a stylized heron standing in reeds, as if the bird itself approved of every rule. Inside was a formal notice, courtesy reminder, watercraft compliance. It listed the maximum allowable length, 25 feet approved color palettes, earth tones, pastels, or white, and a vague reference to visual harmony that felt less like a guideline and more like a verdict. I read it twice on the porch, coffee cooling in my hand. The paper smelled faintly of printer toner and authority. At the bottom, Karen's signature curled like a hook. I folded the letter, slipped it into the preservation binder I kept in the chart drawer, and went back to varnishing the transom. The sun was warm on my shoulders. The lake glinted like hammered silver. For now, the notice was only words. But words have a way of turning into actions when the person writing them believes they're law. Over the following month, the pressure built in small, deliberate increments, never loud enough to alarm outsiders, but steady enough to wear stone smooth. First came the drive-by inspections. Karen's white SUV would cruise slowly past my house 2 or 3 times a week, pausing at the foot of the driveway so she could peer down the slope toward the pier. Sometimes Greg rode shotgun, staring straight ahead, as if the lake itself might offend him if he looked too long. Then the newsletters began arriving with highlighted sections. One edition featured a full-page spread titled "Preserving Our Shared Serenity," complete with stock photos of sleek fiberglass runabouts in soft blues and beiges. My vessel was not pictured, but the caption beneath a grainy shot of an anonymous oversized craft left little doubt non-conforming watercraft detract from property values and community enjoyment. A yellow sticky note appeared on my front door one afternoon. Please schedule removal by 30 days or fines will apply. KW. No stamp, no official letterhead, just her initials in red ink. I responded the way I'd been taught, calmly, thoroughly, and in writing. I photocopied the Navy custodianship agreement, the federal registration, the letter from the Rear Admiral, granting stewardship, even the annual inspection report signed by a civilian contractor cleared by the Department of Defense. I added a polite cover letter explaining that the vessel fell outside HOA jurisdiction. I walked the packet to the community center myself and dropped it through the slot. Silence followed for 10 days. I allowed myself to hope. Hope in retrospect was naive. One Saturday morning, I returned from the hardware store to find 2 men in khaki work shirts chaining a flatbed trailer to my pier bollards. A third was already aboard the vessel, wrapping a tow strap around the bow cleat. My grocery bags hit the grass. "What the hell do you think you're doing?" My voice carried the old quarterdeck edge I hadn't used in years. The older worker glanced up, uncomfortable. "HOA contract, sir. We're just the tow company." I strode down the slope fast enough that gravel scattered under my boots. "This is private property. That vessel is federal property. You lay one more hand on her and you're committing a felony." The younger man hesitated, strap dangling. "We got a signed work order, mister. Says emergency removal for safety violation." Show me. He fished a crumpled sheet from his pocket. At the bottom, Karen Whitmore's signature bold and unmistakable beside the words authorized under Article 12, Section B. Immediate hazard. There was no immediate hazard. There never had been. I stepped between them and the hull. You leave now, no questions asked. You proceed, and I call the sheriff, the state police, and Naval Criminal Investigative Service before you clear the driveway. The older man studied me for a long moment, then shrugged. Not worth the headache. They unhooked the chains and drove off, dust swirling behind them like a bad omen. That night, I installed motion-activated floodlights and a simple security camera aimed at the pier. Petty perhaps, but instinct dies hard. 2 weeks later at 2:47 a.m., the floodlights snapped on. I was out of bed and at the window in seconds. Headlights low and careful, crept down my driveway. A flatbed again this time, with the tow company's logo blacked out by duct tape. 2 figures moved in the glare, quick and practiced. A third stood on the lawn, arms folded, red blazer unmistakable, even in monochrome. Karen. I threw on jeans and boots, grabbed my phone, and ran. By the time I reached the pier, the winch was already screaming. Steel cable bit into the teak rail. The hull groaned as it was dragged sideways across the wooden planks. Sparks flew where metal met metal. Stop, I roared. That's government property. Karen turned face calm under the harsh lights. Mr. Jensen, this is a lawful removal pursuant to repeated violations. There is no lawful removal of a federal asset by a homeowners association. My voice cracked with fury I hadn't felt since combat. She held up her notepad like a shield. Safety concern. Potential hazardous materials. The board granted emergency authority. I stepped closer. You have no authority. You're trespassing. Get off my land. For the first time, something flickered across her face. Uncertainty quickly masked. The winch operator paused. Ma'am? Continue, she said, voice steady again. The cable tightened. The vessel lurched. A sickening scrape echoed across the water as paint and fiberglass gave way. I started filming on my phone, narrating dates, times, names. Karen noticed and stepped into the frame, blocking the lens with her body. This is private association business, she snapped. This is felony tampering, I replied. The driver finally killed the winch. We're not getting in the middle of this. They released the straps and pulled away, leaving deep gouges in the pier and a raw stripe along the vessel's waterline. Karen lingered a moment longer. You'll receive an invoice for the towing fees, she said quietly, almost kindly, as if doing me a favor. Then she walked back to her SUV and disappeared into the night. I stood alone on the pier, breathing hard, staring at the empty slip where moonlight now fell unbroken on black water. The vessel was gone. For the first time in years, the lake felt hostile. And something cold and resolute settled in my chest, the same feeling I'd once known before heading into restricted waters. The fight had only begun. The empty slip stared back at me like an open wound. Morning light spilled across the water, turning the gouged planks of the pier into raw, splintered scars. Oil streaks shimmered on the surface where the hull had bled diesel during the drag. Shredded mooring lines floated like drowned snakes. I stood there in yesterday's clothes, coffee forgotten in my hand, feeling the chill seep through my boots. The lake had always been a place of refuge. Now it felt complicit. I didn't rage. Not outwardly. Years at sea had taught me that fury spent too early leaves you hollow when you need it most. Instead, I cataloged every detail, the angle of the tire tracks in the grass, the broken cleat hanging by one screw, the faint scent of Karen's perfume lingering in the air like an accusation. Inside the house, I opened the safe and pulled out the thick folder stamped with the Navy crest. Inside were the originals, custodianship contract, federal registration maintenance logs, even the commendation letter from the admiral who'd approved my stewardship. My hands didn't shake as I scanned each page, but my jaw ached from clenching. Then I sat at the kitchen table and wrote the email I'd hoped never to send. Subject unauthorized, seizure of federally protected naval vessel VP-121 to Naval Legal Services, NCIS Field Office Veterans. Legal assistance, CC Lieutenant Monroe, personal contact. I attached everything: photos from the security camera, timestamps, license plates of the tow truck, still frames showing Karen on my lawn at 2:47 a.m. giving orders. I described the damage I could already see: scraped, hull shattered. Bright work, the teak rail splintered where the cable had bitten. I kept the language precise, professional, the way I'd once written after-action reports. I hit send at 9:12 a.m. By noon, the first fine arrived. A thick envelope, certified mail return address, Lakeside Preserve, HOA. Inside an invoice for $3,200, broken down into unauthorized military storage, visual obstruction of lakefront, and failure to comply with removal order. A sticky note in Karen's handwriting fluttered out. Payment due in 14 days, lien possible. I laughed one short, bitter bark that echoed off the cedar walls. They were billing me for stealing my own past. That afternoon, I drove to the county sheriff's substation and filed a trespass and theft report. The deputy, a young man with a fresh haircut and polite eyes, listened carefully, took copies of my documents, and promised to forward it up the chain. He didn't say it, but I saw the doubt flicker across his face. HOAs were sacred cows in these parts. When I got home, a second notice was already taped to my door, $800, additional for obstruction of authorized towing operations. I photographed everything, added it to the growing digital folder, and forwarded it to the same recipients as the morning email. The retaliation came faster than I expected. 3 days later, a fire marshal's truck parked in my driveway. 2 inspectors in Navy uniforms knocked politely and asked to check for reported improper fuel storage and possible ordnance. I let them in. They searched the basement, the garage, the shed, even the old footlocker I hadn't opened since Pensacola. They found motor oil in approved containers, a spare propane tank for the grill, and nothing else. The lead inspector apologized on his way out. Anonymous complaint, he said, shrugging. We have to follow up. I knew whose anonymity it was. That same week, someone spray-painted unsafe structure in dripping red letters across my curb. The county confirmed no utility work had been scheduled. The HOA office claimed ignorance. Neighbors began to look away when I walked past. The older couple who used to chat about fishing now hurried inside. The young mother with the golden retriever crossed the street rather than pass my driveway. Whispers followed me at the mailbox, words like troublemaker, hoarder, unstable. Only one person approached me directly. Harris, retired Army helicopter pilot, Vietnam vet, silver hair, always tucked under a faded First Cav cap. Stopped me outside the community center after I dropped off another certified response to the fines. They're going too far, Cal, he said quietly, glancing over his shoulder. Karen's telling folks your boat had explosives aboard, saying it was a safety issue. Most of us don't buy it, but people get nervous. I nodded. It's a Memorial Harris, not a threat. I know. He hesitated. Some of us tried to slow her down at the last board meeting. She shut it down. Claims full emergency powers. He handed me a folded sheet, minutes from a closed session I hadn't been invited to. Karen had invoked a rarely used clause, allowing unilateral action in the interest of immediate community safety. No vote recorded, just her signature. Keep this, he said, might help. I tucked it away. Thank you. He clapped my shoulder once the way men who've seen fire do, then walked off. That night I sat on the pier with a lantern staring at the dark rectangle of water where the vessel should have been. The air smelled of pine and impending rain. I pulled out my phone and opened the photos I'd taken the day I first brought her home, hull gleaming, flag crisp. Ellen's smile bright in the background as she stood on the bow holding Danny on her hip. I didn't cry, but the ache in my chest was deeper than any wound I'd earned in service. 48 hours after my initial email, my phone rang with a number I recognized from the folder. Commander Jensen, Lieutenant Monroe, Naval Legal Services. Just Cal is fine. Sir, we've reviewed your documentation and footage. This is a clear violation of federal custodianship. Tampering with a preserved asset, especially one moved without authorization, falls under several statutes, including damage to government property. I exhaled slowly. We're escalating to NCIS immediately, he continued. They'll take lead on recovery and criminal referral. In the meantime, do not pay any fines. Do not engage directly with the HOA president and keep recording everything. Understood. One more thing, Cal. His voice softened. What they did wasn't just illegal. It was wrong. The Navy doesn't forget its own. I thanked him and hung up. For the first time since the empty slip appeared, the night felt a fraction less heavy. But the war was far from over. Karen still held the reins, and she wasn't finished yet. The call came at 6:03 a.m. on a Tuesday that smelled of rain and gun oil coffee. I was on the pier running a rag along the empty bollards out of habit when the phone buzzed against my chest like a live round. Cal Jensen. Commander, this is Special Agent Marcus Buckley, NCIS. Lieutenant Monroe forwarded your file. I'm lead on the recovery. Tell me you haven't touched anything at the pier since the seizure. Nothing except to photograph the damage, I said. Good. We're rolling a team in from Atlanta this morning. 2 unmarked Suburbans. They'll be at your place within the hour. I need you to walk me through every second of that night one more time while it's still fresh. I closed my eyes and let the memory flood back colder than the morning air. I told him about the floodlights snapping on the blacked-out tow truck, the way the winch screamed like a wounded animal, the exact words Karen spoke when she stepped into the glare. I told him about the smell of hot metal and the way the hull cried as it was dragged across the planks. I told him how the flag had twisted sideways on its staff, flapping like a broken wing. When I finished, Buckley was quiet long enough that I heard his pen stop moving. Sir, he said at last, voice low, I've seen men lose limbs and keep better composure than what you just described. What they did to that vessel, it's a desecration. We're treating this as a level 3 custodial breach. That's the same category we use for stolen war graves. I swallowed. Find her for me, Agent Buckley. We already have. My knees nearly buckled. She's in a fenced lot off Highway 22, 43 miles west of here. Owner goes by Ray Kellerman, HOA, treasurer ring, any bells? The name hit like a cold slap. Ray. Quiet guy, always in the back row at meetings, nodding whenever Karen spoke. Buckley continued. Lot owner claims the boat was abandoned property, paid cash, no paperwork, no title. Said a man in a Lakeside Preserve magnetic sign truck dropped it off and told him to hold it until further notice. We've got the dash cam footage from the gate. Timestamp matches your security video. Same truck, same driver, same red blazered passenger riding shotgun. Karen. They stripped her, Buckley said, and his voice carried the kind of anger men only use when something sacred has been violated. Electronics gutted navigation console, gone helm drawer pried open with a crowbar. Brass plaque with the crew names ripped clean off. Some of the missing parts are already listed on a marine salvage site out of Mobile. We shut the auction down an hour ago. I gripped the phone so hard the plastic creaked. But the hull's intact, he added quickly, structurally sound. We can bring her home, Cal, and we will. I managed to ask the only question that mattered. Today, recovery team's en route. I'll be with them. We'll need you there to sign the chain of custody transfer when we load her. After that, she goes straight to the preservation yard in Pensacola for full restoration Navy's dime. Every scratch, every missing rivet. We're putting her back exactly the way you kept her. I stared across the empty water until it blurred. One more thing, Buckley said. Karen Whitmore's been served a federal cease and desist. She tries to set foot on your property, again she's detained. Same for anyone acting under her direction. This is no longer an HOA matter. It's a United States Navy matter. I exhaled a breath I hadn't realized I'd been holding for weeks. Thank you. Don't thank me yet, Commander. Thank me when she's floating in your slip again, and that flag is flying straight. He hung up. I stood on the pier a long time, letting the wind cut through my shirt. The lake was the color of polished steel, and for the first time since that night, it looked less like a grave and more like a promise. At 10:47 a.m., the black Suburbans rolled in, no lights, no sirens, just purpose. Buckley stepped out first, short, compact eyes that had seen too much and still looked for more. He shook my hand with a grip that said he understood weight. Behind him, 4 agents in windbreakers and 2 civilian preservation specialists unloaded evidence kits and cameras. They worked the pier like a crime scene, photographing gouges, collecting paint chips, bagging fragments of torn line. Buckley handed me a clipboard. Formal complaint against Whitmore Kellerman and the towing contractor. Sign here. This triggers the criminal referral. I signed without hesitation. He watched me, then spoke quietly. You held the line alone a long time. Old habit, I said. He gave a short nod, respect not pity, and turned back to his team. By noon, the convoy was ready to roll out to the salvage lot. Buckley paused at my side. You ride with me, he said. She's waited long enough to see you again. I climbed into the passenger seat, the door shutting with the solid thunk of government steel. As we pulled away, I looked back once at the empty pier. It wouldn't be empty for long. The salvage lot sat baking under a merciless noon sun chain link fence topped with rusted barbed wire weeds, pushing through cracked asphalt like green fingers reaching for freedom. The air smelled of hot rubber diesel exhaust and something metallic blood memory for anyone who'd ever worked a flight deck. And there she was. VP 121 lay tilted on her side behind a sagging tarp, half hidden between a gutted pontoon boat and a stack of abandoned jet skis. Her hull was streaked with road grime and fresh gouges that wept rust like slow tears. The starboard rail hung splintered. The navigation lights were smashed. Someone had spray-painted scrap in orange across the transom, the letters dripping like an afterthought. I stopped breathing for a moment. Buckley laid a hand on my shoulder. "She's hurt Cal, but she's whole. We've seen worse come back from deeper graves." The preservation techs moved in with practiced efficiency, measuring, photographing, cataloging every scar. One of them pried open the cabin door and swore softly under his breath. I stepped aboard. The interior had been ransacked with casual cruelty. Charts scattered like fallen leaves. Cushions slashed. The helm drawer, Ellen's drawer, hung open, splintered lock dangling. The bundle of letters was gone. I felt the deck tilt beneath me, though the boat hadn't moved. Buckley appeared at the companionway. We recovered a plastic bin labeled Musk from the lot owner's office. Contents match what you described. Letters, photographs, a few personal effects. They're in evidence bags now, but they're yours again. I nodded, throat too tight for words. He hesitated. "There's something else. The brass plaque, the one with your crew names, was pried off. We found it in a toolbox, bent but intact. We'll straighten it." I ran my fingers over the empty screw holes where it had hung for decades. Names I could still recite in my sleep. Jackson, Morales, Lee. Men who'd trusted me with their lives. One of them hadn't come home. Outside the lot owner, a heavy-set man in a stained cap was being questioned against his pickup truck. Ray Kellerman stood nearby, pale beneath his tan, answering questions with short, clipped sentences. When our eyes met, he looked away fast. Karen wasn't there. Smart. By late afternoon, the recovery team had her loaded onto a lowboy trailer strapped down with the reverence usually reserved for fallen flags. Buckley signed the final paperwork and handed me a copy. "She's headed to Pensacola Naval Air Station Yard tonight," he said. "Full forensic exam, then restoration. Estimate 6 to 8 weeks. Navy's covering everything: hull work, electronics, cosmetics. When she comes home, she'll be better than new." I managed a rough thank you. He studied me. "You're not the first veteran they've tried to push around. Won't be the last. But you're the first one who pushed back hard enough to make the federal government notice. That matters." The convoy pulled out just as thunderheads began stacking in the west. I followed in my truck, keeping the trailer in sight until it turned south toward the interstate. Only then did I head home. The retaliation didn't pause for sentiment. 2 days later, another certified envelope fines now totaled $600–700, with new charges for interference with association contractors and defamation of community leadership. The sticky note read in Karen's precise script: "Legal counsel assures us our actions were fully within authority. Please remit payment to avoid further escalation." That same afternoon, my auto-pay dues were mysteriously declined, triggering a late notice and threat of lien. Then came the anonymous calls, breathing on the line hang-ups at 3 a.m. My driveway camera caught a figure in a hoodie slashing one of my tires. The footage was too dark for a positive ID, but the build looked familiar. The neighborhood fracture widened. Some residents stopped waving altogether. Others left baked goods on my porch with notes: "We're sorry. Not all of us agree." One envelope contained cash, 320s, and a handwritten apology from someone who'd voted with Karen out of fear. Harris invited me for coffee at his place, away from prying eyes. "She's doubling down," he said, over mugs that steamed between us. "Told the board if we don't back her property values, we'll tank because of the negative publicity." Ray's lawyered up already. "Greg looks like he hasn't slept in weeks." I told him about the recovery. He whistled low. "Federal agents hauling her out of that lot, that's gonna leave a mark." "It needs to," I said. He leaned forward. "Cal, there's talk of a special meeting. Karen wants to push through permanent bans on anything military in appearance. She's framing you as the villain, says you brought the feds down on all of us. Some folks are scared enough to believe her." "Let them," I replied. "Fear's a poor foundation for community." He studied me. "You're calmer than I'd be." Calm's a skill you learn when the alternative is unacceptable. That night, I sat on the pier again, lantern glowing soft against the dark. The empty slip looked less like a wound now and more like a held breath. I pulled out my phone, and opened the evidence photos Buckley had emailed close-ups of the recovered letters still tied with Ellen's faded blue ribbon. They were creased, diesel-stained in places, but intact. Every word still hers. I read one by moonlight, the one she'd written during my last deployment, when the cancer had just returned. "Come home to me, Cal. The lake will wait. We'll sit on the porch and watch the stars until they forget how to fall." I folded it carefully, slipped it into my shirt pocket over my heart. The storm was coming, but so was she. And when the vessel returned, the lake would remember whose water it was. The knock came at dusk, soft enough that I almost missed it over the low rumble of thunder rolling across the lake. I opened the door to find Greg Whitmore standing on my porch, hands buried in his jacket pockets, shoulders hunched against the wind. His face looked thinner than I remembered, eyes shadowed with the kind of fatigue that sleep doesn't fix. "Evening, Cal," he said, voice barely above the patter of rain starting on the tin roof. "Can I come in a minute?" I stepped aside without a word. He crossed the threshold like a man entering hostile territory, glancing around the living room, as if expecting accusations to leap from the walls. I didn't offer coffee. I didn't offer a seat. I just waited. He pulled a small cedar box from his pocket and held it out. "She told me to throw this away," he said. "Found it when they were stripping the cabin. Figured it wasn't trash." I took the box. My fingers knew the weight before I even opened it. Inside, wrapped in a faded blue ribbon, lay Ellen's letters, creased, smudged with fingerprints and diesel, but every envelope intact. On top rested a single photograph, Ellen and 5-year-old Danny on the bow, her arms around him, both of them laughing into the wind, while I steered somewhere off the Carolina coast. I couldn't speak. Greg cleared his throat. "I was Navy Reserve, 2 years active before I went into finance. I know what a boat like that means. Memories aren't just wood and steel." He met my eyes for the first time. I didn't know she was going to take it that far. The midnight tow. The part's on auction. I thought there'd be a hearing, lawyers, something civilized. By the time I realized, he trailed off, shaking his head. I should have stopped her. I set the box on the table like it was made of glass. Why tell me this now? Because people are starting to talk. Really talk. Harris has been showing those meeting minutes around. Folks are angry about the fines the fire marshal stunts the spray paint. And now, federal agents crawling all over the salvage lot. He gave a tired half smile. Karen's narrative isn't holding. He moved toward the door, then paused. She's not home much anymore. Spends nights at the community center prepping defenses. Says the Navy's bluffing. I don't think they are. After he left, I carried the cedar box to the pier and sat beneath the lantern's golden pool. Rain hissed on the water around me. One by one, I opened the letters, letting Ellen's voice rise through the storm. She wrote about ordinary things, Danny's first loose tooth, the way the dogwood bloomed early that spring, how she missed the smell of salt on my skin. She wrote about fear, too, in careful sentences that never quite admitted how frightened she was. And she wrote about the boat. "Keep her safe for me, Cal. She'll bring you home when I can't." I read until the pages blurred and the rain soaked my shirt. When I finally went inside, I placed the letters back in their ribbon and set the box on the kitchen counter where morning light would find it first. The next morning, Buckley called. "We're ready for your formal interview," he said. "VFW Hall in town, neutral ground. Bring anything you want on record." I arrived early. The hall smelled of old coffee and polished wood. Buckley had claimed a small meeting room in the back, American flag, in one corner, POWMIA banner on the wall. He introduced me to his partner, Agent Ruiz, a quiet woman with sharp eyes and a notepad that never seemed to run out of pages. We went through everything again, slower this time. I walked them through the timeline, handed over the new finds, the tire slashing footage, the recovered letters now bearing strangers' fingerprints. When I described finding the cedar box on my table, Buckley's jaw tightened. "That's evidence of intent to permanently deprive," he said. "Adds weight to the theft charge." He slid a folder across the table. Preliminary restoration report from Pensacola. Hull damage is cosmetic and structural, in places needs new stringers portside, but the keel's true. Electronics can be replaced with period-correct units from surplus. They've already begun welding patches. 8 weeks tops, maybe 6 if the yard pushes. He paused. "There's something else. We pulled Karen's phone records warrant came through yesterday. Texts to Ray Kellerman the night of the tow. Make sure it disappears until this blows over. Another to the tow company, cash bonus if you're done before dawn." I leaned back, feeling the walls of the small room press in. She really thought she'd get away with it. People like that usually do, Ruiz said, speaking for the first time. Until they don't. Buckley closed the folder. We're preparing charges: theft of government property, criminal mischief, conspiracy, possibly destruction of a historical artifact. NCS doesn't move fast, but we move sure. When we file, it'll be airtight. I nodded. One last thing, he said softer. The Preservation Office wants to honor you. Civilian Stewardship Commendation. Small ceremony when she comes home. Your call whether you accept. I thought of Ellen's letters waiting on the counter. I'll think about it. That night, I dreamed of the vessel under full power cutting clean water under a starlit sky. Ellen's laughter carrying over the bow. I woke before dawn with the echo of engine rumble in my chest and the certainty that the tide, slow, inexorable, was turning. Outside, the rain had stopped. The lake lay glass smooth, reflecting the first pale hint of sunrise. She was coming home, and this time nothing would stand in her way. The day they brought her home felt like the lake itself held its breath. A low gray sky hung over the water, the kind of overcast that turns everything silver and sharp. I stood on the pier in my old Navy peacoat collar up against the wind, watching the bend in the road where the driveway crested the hill. At 10:17 a.m., the convoy appeared, two unmarked Navy pickups, flanking a flatbed trailer draped in olive canvas. No fanfare, no sirens, just the steady rumble of diesel and the soft slap of tires on wet asphalt. The preservation crew moved with quiet precision, backing the trailer down the slope, as if guiding a casket into sacred ground. When they pulled the canvas away, my heart stuttered. She gleamed. The hull wore fresh navy gray, deeper and richer than before, with VP Wallen 21 stenciled in crisp white along the bow. Scars had been welded, sanded, filled, painted over, until only the keenest eye could trace where violence had touched her. New teak rails shone honey gold. The brass plaque, straightened, polished, re-etched, caught the pale light like a promise kept. The flag at the stern snapped once, in the breeze colors bright as the day it was first raised. A chief petty officer I didn't know approached, saluted out of habit, even though I wore no uniform, and handed me the new mooring lines. She's yours again, sir. Better than she left. I couldn't answer. I just nodded and took the lines. They lowered her gently. The hull kissed the water with a soft sigh, rocking once, twice, then settling into the slip as if she'd never left. The familiar creak of timber against rubber fenders sounded like a homecoming hymn. I stepped aboard. The deck was warm under my palm, despite the chill air. Inside the cabin, everything had been restored to period rebuilt helm console, rewired gauges, glowing faintly cushions reupholstered in the original dark blue. The drawer beneath the chart slid open, smooth as silk. I placed Ellen's cedar box inside ribbon, tied tight, and closed it with a soft click. Only then did I notice the crowd. They had gathered quietly along the shoreline, neighbors I hadn't spoken to in months, some I barely knew. Kids perched on parents' shoulders. Harris stood front and center in his first cav cap, arms crossed, eyes shining. Even Greg was there alone, hands in his pockets, looking smaller than I remembered. No one cheered. They simply watched as if witnessing something larger than one man and one boat. When I looked up, Harris raised a hand in solemn salute. Others followed, slow, deliberate, the way veterans acknowledge each other across decades and branches. A woman I recognized as the young mother with the golden retriever wiped her eyes. Someone started clapping, soft at first, then steady, spreading along the bank like ripples. I raised my own hand in return, not a wave, but an acknowledgement. The sound of applause rolled across the water and wrapped around the vessel like a blessing. That evening, the community center gymnasium filled beyond capacity. Word had spread: emergency HOA meeting, open to all residents, agenda item 1, review of recent board actions. The folding chairs were packed. People stood 3 deep along the walls. Veterans in ball caps dotted the crowd like signal flags. Karen wasn't present. Her attorney had advised against it, rumor said. Acting President Don Weathers, a thin, nervous man who'd always voted whatever way the wind blew, stood at the podium gripping the edges until his knuckles went white. He cleared his throat 3 times before speaking. Fellow residents, we've received formal notification from the Naval Criminal Investigative Service and the Department of the Navy that certain actions taken by this board, specifically the removal of a federally protected vessel from Lot 19, constituted multiple violations of federal law. A low murmur rippled through the room. Don plowed on. All fines, liens, and enforcement actions related to that property are hereby suspended indefinitely. The association is cooperating fully with ongoing investigations. Harris stood. Question he called voice carrying without a microphone. Was the midnight tow authorized by a full board vote? Don hesitated. It was executed under emergency provisions. Whose signature appears on the work order Harris pressed? Don glanced at a folder. Former President Whitmore's. The murmur grew louder. A woman near the front, Mrs. Langston, whose husband had served in Korea, rose unsteadily. You woke a decorated veteran in the middle of the night and stole his memorial, then fined him for resisting. Is that the community we want? Voices rose in agreement. Another resident, my son's in the Army. If this is how we treat one veteran, how will we treat him when he comes home? The room erupted not in chaos, but in a groundswell of long-suppressed frustration. Stories spilled out petty fines for flag displays, threats over holiday lights, intimidation at mailboxes. Karen's reign, held together by fear and paperwork, cracked wide open under the weight of shared truth. Someone moved to dissolve the current board and call immediate elections. The vote was nearly unanimous. Don looked relieved more than anything. As the meeting broke up, Harris found me near the exit. She's gone, he said simply. Karen put the house on the market this morning. Heading to Arizona, they say. I nodded. He studied my face. You all right? I thought of the vessel rocking gently at her mooring flag, proud against the dusk. Getting there. He smiled, the first real one I'd seen from him in months. Good, because that boat carried you a long way. Now it's your turn to carry her. I walked home under a clearing sky, stars pricking through the clouds like distant running lights. The pier lights glowed soft on the water. VP 121 waited steady and serene, as if the weeks of exile had been only a bad dream. I stepped aboard, cast off the spring line, and let her drift a few feet into the cove, just far enough to feel the lake breathe beneath us. Then I sat on the helm bench, hand resting on the wheel, and spoke aloud to the night. She's home, Ellen. The wind answered, gentle and sure. And for the first time in a long while, the lake felt whole again. The courthouse in the county seat was an old brick building with white columns and a clock tower that chimed the hours like a patient reminder of time's indifference. On the morning of the hearing, winter sunlight slanted through bare oaks, casting long shadows across the steps where reporters and neighbors already gathered. I arrived early, wearing the only suit I owned, the one from Ellen's funeral tie, knotted with fingers that hadn't trembled in years until today. Danny had flown in the night before and walked beside me now, dress blues, crisp metals, subdued but present. He didn't say much, just squeezed my shoulder once as we climbed the steps. Inside the courtroom smelled of polished oak and old paper. The gallery filled quickly. Harris in his veteran's cap, Mrs. Langston with her cane, Greg alone in the back row, looking like a man attending his own wake. Reporters scribbled in the rear benches. Karen's seat at the defense table remained empty. Her attorney had filed a motion citing safety concerns. The judge denied it. Judge Harlan entered, robe, sweeping gray hair pulled severe. She was a former JAG officer. Word was new, the weight of uniform and oath better than most. The Navy's case was presented by a civilian counsel working with Buckley and Monroe. He spoke without theatrics, letting the evidence do the work. Security footage projected on a screen, the midnight scrape of hull on wood echoing through the speakers. Photographs of the violated cabin, Ellen's letters strewn like trash. Auction listings for stolen parts. Text messages glowing in stark white on black. When the helm drawer appeared on screen, splintered empty, the room went utterly still. Then the judge turned to me. Commander Jensen, would you like to address the court? I rose. The walk to the witness stand felt longer than any quarterdeck I'd ever crossed. I placed my hand on the Bible, out of habit, more than belief, swore to tell the truth, and looked out at the room. Your Honor, I began, voice steady, though my heart pounded like distant artillery. I didn't come home from 28 years of service expecting parades or gratitude. I came home wanting quiet. A place by the water where I could keep a piece of my past, safe, the vessel that carried me through storms most folks never hear about, that held my wife's last words to me, that taught my son what duty looks like before he ever put on his own uniform. I paused, letting the words settle. That boat wasn't clutter. She was memory made steel. She was the place I grieved, the place I healed, the place I promised my dying wife I'd keep safe. When they took her in the dark, chained and dragged her away, they didn't just commit theft. They tried to erase part of who I am. I turned toward the empty defense table. Rules matter. I respect them. I lived by them. But when rules become weapons to bully, to intimidate, to strip a veteran of dignity in his own home, they stop being rules. They become tyranny, wearing a blazer and carrying a ledger. A few heads nodded in the gallery. Danny's eyes never left mine. I didn't want this fight, I continued. I paid my dues, kept my lawn cut, stayed quiet. But silence in the face of wrong is surrender. So I stood. Not for revenge, for restoration. For the idea that service still means something when the uniform comes off. I looked directly at Judge Harlan. Your Honor, I ask only for what was taken to be made right. The vessel restored, the fines voided, and an acknowledgement that no one, no board, no president, no clipboard, gets to decide a veteran's memories don't belong. I sat down. The HOA attorney rose next. He spoke of misunderstandings, overzealous enforcement, good intentions gone awry. He offered apologies on behalf of the association, promised policy reforms pledged to cover restoration costs already underway. Judge Harlan listened without expression. When both sides rested, she took a long moment, pen poised over her notes. Then she spoke, voice clear and unhurried. This court finds that the actions of the Lakeside Preserve Homeowners Association, specifically the unauthorized seizure and attempted disposal of a federally protected naval vessel, constituted theft of government property, criminal trespass, and intentional infliction of emotional distress. The subsequent fines and retaliatory measures were unlawful and are hereby vacated in their entirety. A rustle went through the room. The association will pay full restitution for all documented damages, including legal fees incurred by Commander Jensen. Further, the association is ordered to publish a formal apology drafted by this court and approved by the plaintiff in every official communication channel for the next 6 months. She looked out over the gallery. Leadership is service, not dominion. When those entrusted with it forget that they dishonor not only the individual harmed, but the community they claim to protect. Let this serve as notice: the uniforms may come off, but the values they represent do not retire. The gavel fell sharp final. Outside, the winter sun felt warmer. Reporters surged forward with questions, but neighbors reached me first. Hands shaken, backs clapped quiet thank yous from people who'd once looked away. Mrs. Langston pressed a small American flag pin into my palm. My husband would have stood with you, she whispered. Danny waited until we reached the truck. You okay, Dad? I looked back at the courthouse, then at him, tall, proud, the man Ellen and I had raised. Better than okay, I said. That night, the new temporary HOA committee delivered a letter by hand. Inside was the court-ordered apology printed on heavy stock, signed by every remaining board member. At the bottom, in Harris's handwriting, we're renaming the community pier in honor of local veterans. Ribbon cutting next spring. We'd be honored if you'd do the honors. I set it beside Ellen's cedar box on the kitchen table. Later, I walked to the pier alone. The vessel rocked gently, running lights glowing soft against the dark water. I stepped aboard, ran my hand along the restored rail, and felt the faint thrum of the lake beneath her keel. Justice had been served quiet, thorough Navy style. But healing, that was happening one ripple at a time. And it felt like the beginning of something stronger than before. Spring arrived like an apology the lake had been waiting to accept. Dogwoods bloomed white along the shoreline, redbuds flashed purple against new green, and the water warmed enough that the morning mist lifted by 9 o'clock. With it came Danny Duffel, over one shoulder, orders for extended leave in his pocket, and the quiet determination of a son who'd decided home mattered more than distance. He bought the small fixer-upper, 2 coves, down peeling paint sagging porch, but with its own narrow pier and a view straight across to mine. We spent the first week sanding floors and replacing rotted joists, working side by side, in the easy silence men fall into when tools do the talking. Evenings found us on my vessel engines, idling low as we motored slow circles around the lake. Danny took the helm more often than not. I sat aft with a thermos of coffee, watching the wake spread silver behind us. One such evening, the sun bleeding orange across the water, he killed the throttle and let us drift. I read more of Mom's letters, he said, voice low over the slap of water against the hull. The ones from your last deployment. She never complained, just missed you. Told you to come home safe because she had plans for this lake. I nodded, throat thick. She'd have liked this, he went on, gesturing at the restored cabin, the polished plaque, the flag snapping overhead. You fighting for it, for us. I looked at him, broad shoulders filling out the same way mine once had, eyes carrying weight no 20-something should know. I didn't do it for applause, I said. I did it because letting them take her would have meant letting them take part of you, part of her. And I'd lost enough. He rested his forearms on the wheel, staring out where the first stars pricked the darkening sky. I blamed you, you know. When I was a kid, for being gone so much, for the deployments that kept you away when she got sick. He exhaled slowly. Took joining up myself to understand it wasn't absence, it was duty. And you carried it so we didn't have to. The confession hung between us like lake mist. I reached over and gripped his shoulder. I wasn't there the way I wanted to be. I live with that every day. But I'm here now. He covered my hand with his. Yeah, you are. We let the quiet settle the vessel, rocking gently beneath us like a cradle. Later that summer, the new HOA leaner, humbler, veteran heavy held the ribbon cutting for the renamed community pier, Lakeside Veterans Wharf. They'd installed a bronze plaque listing every resident who'd served past and present. My name was there. So was Harris's. So was Danny's, freshly added. I cut the ribbon with the same knife I'd carried on deployments, the crowd larger than anyone expected. Kids waved small flags. Someone fired up a grill. The smell of charcoal and burgers drifted across the water. A local high school band played a shaky but earnest Anchor's Awe. Afterward, neighbors I hadn't spoken to in years stopped me to talk not about fines or rules, but about sons in the service, fathers who'd come home, changed boats they remembered from childhood. Greg brought his grandson over, let the boy climb aboard VP 121, and sit at the helm under my supervision. The kid's eyes went wide when I let him sound the horn, short, respectful blasts that echoed across the cove. Greg lingered after. House sold last week, he said quietly. Karen's already in Arizona. New job, new start. He shrugged. Some bridges burn cleaner than others. I nodded. No need for more. That fall, we took the vessel out farther than I had in years past the no-wake zone, into the main channel where the water opened wide and deep. Danny handled the lines like he'd been born to it. We fished for bass that never bit, talked about everything and nothing, watched eagles wheel overhead. One night, anchored under a full moon that turned the lake to molten pewter, he asked the question I'd been waiting for. You ever think about selling her, getting something newer, easier? I looked around the cabin, teak glowing warm in the lantern light, Ellen's cedar box secure in its drawer, the plaque with fallen brothers' names catching soft reflections. No, I said. She's not done carrying us yet. He smiled, the same half-smile I saw in old photographs of myself at his age. Good. The next morning, we cruised back, slow sun rising astern, painting the water gold. As we rounded the final bend, I saw them waiting, dozens of neighbors lining the shore, coffee cups in hand, kids running along the water's edge. Someone had chalked "Welcome Home" in big letters across the community pier. Danny throttled down until we idled. Looks like they finally get it, he said. I stood at the bow, hand on the rail that had been splintered and restored, feeling the familiar thrum through the deck plates. No, I replied softly. They're remembering who we all are. The vessel eased into her slip, as if she'd never left, lines tossed and caught by willing hands. People boarded in small groups, respectful, quiet, asking questions, listening to stories, touching the plaque with reverence. Later, when the crowd thinned and the sun climbed high, Danny and I sat on the pier with our boots dangling over the edge. He bumped my shoulder. Mom would have loved this. Yeah, I said, watching dragonflies skim the surface. She always said the lake would heal what the sea couldn't. He was quiet a moment. Then let's keep giving it time. We did. Season by season, memory by memory, the vessel carried us forward, not away from the past, but through it, steady and sure. And for the first time in longer than I could count, the quiet felt full instead of empty. Winter settled over the lake like a quiet watchstander, faithful and unhurried. Mornings dawned, frost-laced, the water's edge, rimmed with thin ice that cracked softly under the vessel's gentle rocking. The trees stood bare branches, etched black against pale skies, and the air carried the clean bite of wood smoke from distant chimneys. VP 121 remained moored under her fitted cover, winterized and secure, yet every day I walked the pier to check her lines, brush snow from the tarp, trace my gloved fingers along the hull as if confirming she still breathed. Some habits outlive the need for them. They become rituals of gratitude. Danny stayed through the holidays, then extended his leave again. His house took shape, new windows, fresh paint the color of storm clouds, a small American flag on the porch that caught the same breeze as mine. We fell into a rhythm mornings, splitting wood or tuning the vessel's engine. In the shed afternoons, walking the frozen shoreline, talking about everything we'd once left. Unsaid evenings with a fire crackling and Ellen's letters spread between us like charts to a country we were rediscovering. One crystalline January morning, the lake flat and mirror still, we took the cover off just long enough to sit in the cabin. Breath fogged in the cold air. Sunlight slanted through the ports and lit dust motes like slow-moving stars. Danny ran a hand over the brass plaque, reading the names aloud, as he'd started doing whenever silence stretched too long. "Jackson," he said softly, "you ever tell me how he saved 3 of us when the Zodiac flipped? In heavy seas, I finished. Took shrapnel pulling Morales clear. Never made it to the helo." Danny nodded, tracing the engraved date. "I think about guys like him when I'm out there now. Makes the risk feel smaller." I looked at him, my son seasoned beyond his years, eyes carrying the same far horizon I once wore. "You carry them too," I said. "That's the deal. We keep them alive by remembering, right?" He smiled small and real. "You taught me that without ever saying it." We sat until the cold drove us back inside, boots crunching on frozen grass. Spring returned, gradual but certain. Ice-retreated geese arrived in noisy skeins, and the dogwoods bloomed again, this time brighter, as if the lake itself had decided to celebrate. The new HOA, now veteran-led and deliberately lean, asked if I'd serve on a small advisory council. I accepted, not for power, but for watchfulness. We rewrote sections of the covenants, clearer language, stronger protections for personal property, a permanent veterans liaison. Meetings were short voices, measured decisions rooted in decency rather than dominance. One warm April evening, the community gathered again at the Veterans Wharf for a simple ceremony installation of a flagpole and eternal light. I was asked to raise the first flag. As the halyard ran smooth through my hands and the colors broke against a cloudless sky, applause rose, not thunderous, but deep. The sound of a people who'd learned something worth keeping. Danny stood beside me in civilian clothes, hand over heart. When the flag reached full height, he leaned close. "Mom's watching this," he said. I felt it too, the breeze shifting, carrying the faint scent of lavender across the water. That summer we took longer cruises than ever before, often with neighborhood kids, aboard learning knots and compass points, or with Harris spinning helicopter stories from Vietnam while the sun dipped low. The vessel cut clean wakes through water that had once felt hostile and now felt like family. One August night, anchored in the middle of the lake, under a sky thick with Milky Way, Danny asked the question that closed the circle. "You still think about selling, moving on?" I looked around, cabin warm, with lantern glow, Ellen's cedar box, secure the plaque, gleaming the flag furled neatly for the night. "No," I said. "She floats just fine. And so do we." He laughed, full unguarded, the sound I remembered from before deployments and cancer and distance. "Then let's keep sailing." We did. Year after year, season after season. The vessel grew older, earned new scars from gentle use, carried new stories. Danny's leave turned permanent. He separated honorably and stayed building a life on the same water that had anchored me. Grandchildren came first, one then another, learning to swim off the transom, to steer by stars, to respect the quiet power of memory made manifest. I grew older too. Hair silver, step slower. But the pure ritual never changed, morning coffee in hand. A quiet greeting to the hull, a silent thank you to the woman whose letters still rested beneath the helm. Some evenings, I sat alone on the bench seat, hand on the wheel, though we drifted nowhere, listening to water speak against fiberglass. The lake had seen storms and midnight thefts, federal convoys and courtroom gavels, fear and redemption. It had watched a man rebuild himself, one plank, one memory, one reconciled relationship at a time. And in the end, it gave back what had never truly been taken. Not victory, not vengeance, but something enduring. The knowledge that honor doesn't rust, that duty doesn't retire, that love spoken in letters forged in service, carried across years and water floats long after the storms pass. Because some vessels are built not just to weather the sea, but to refuse to sink. And on quiet mornings when the mist rises, and the pines whisper and the flag lifts in the first breeze of day, VP 121 still rocks gently at her mooring, steady, proud home. Whole, forever afloat.